Hi there. I'm Joyce Graff. I'm with the Powerful Patient in Brookline, Massachusetts. And I have with me today a very special guest, the Breakfast Queen of Chicago, Ina Pinkney. And we're going to talk a little bit about post-polio syndrome. So Ina, start off by telling us how you earned the title of Breakfast Queen of Chicago.
Well, as a marketing guru, I gave it to myself and everybody bought it. So I said, why struggle? People did say that I was the queen of the breakfast. And I thought, okay, there it is. There's my new handle. And this was at the beginning of all of the social media. And so I became the breakfast queen, and it worked, and it still works.
You had a wonderful restaurant in Chicago for a very long time.
I did, and I closed it 9 years ago, and I still have relevancy because I was a trailblazer in every way, a woman-owned business, a woman chef back in the 90s. And so, yeah, people still call on me, and I try to mentor all the young women chefs in Chicago because I understand their worlds.
Great. So this used to be a man's world, and yet women are supposed to be the ones who are normally in the kitchen. So it's a woman's role to be in the kitchen, but a man's role to be a chef.
Well, yeah, actually somebody nailed Paul Bocuse with that when he said women don't belong in the kitchen. And they said to him, so who fed you when you were growing up? No. So let me begin today by addressing this notion of being a hidden disability. I had polio at 18 months in 1944, and I was able to rebound enough to be able to camouflage a lot of my disability, which was a shortened leg and a smaller foot size. And there were people who didn't even know that I had a limp until they saw me walk down the aisle when I got married at 22. So I was able to camouflage really well. And somewhere in 1982, I was 40 or a little bit older than that, I was having muscle weakness that I could not identify. And it wasn't painful, but it was definitely happening. And then there were weeks when I would go along and have some swallowing issues, and I couldn't figure out what that was. And so I went to my family practitioner and I said, this is what's happening. And he looked at me and he said, well, you're getting older. And I went, no, this is not what we're talking about here. I'm 42, 43 years old. This is not what this is. And he said, well, I don't know what to make of it. Why don't you take some aspirin or whatever? And he knew that I had polio, but those two things didn't seem to gel. Now, I don't know how we found out things before Google, but I had heard there was an organization called Polio Health International. And I heard they were having a conference in St. Louis. And I had a bakery at the time. And I said to my husband, I'm going down to this conference. And I got in the car and I drove to St. Louis. And I walked into the grand ballroom of a hotel. And I was sitting with 300 people who were having the same complaints. And it was at that moment that the switch was flipped and people began to talk about the late effects of polio. And according to the World Health Organization Book of Diseases, polio is now the only disease that has 3 entries. It has not only the poliomyelitis, it has a post-polio sequelae, and now it has post-polio syndrome. So we are validated in many ways. And doctors who say it doesn't exist, we gladly point them to the World Health Organization Book of Diseases. It was a very challenging time to find out what to do about this. The common belief was do some exercise and you'll be fine. Well, if I could take back every hour of jazzercise that I did with my pink leotards and my purple leg warmers, I would gladly take it back because the disability would have stayed away for a longer period of time.
Really?
So yes, because I overused all of the neurons. They were dying off, and I overused everything I had in order to follow the directives of the doctors who said, just exercise some more.
So this is sort of counterintuitive. You know, if your muscles are feeling weak, you ought to exercise more and really strengthen them. And you know, if you don't get to that level of pain, you're not doing it enough. And yet, for post-polio syndrome, that turns out not to be a good advice.
The mantra is conserve to preserve. One of the reasons I closed my restaurant almost 9 years ago is because I just couldn't walk well anymore, and I couldn't work the room. I certainly stopped cooking years before that, but I couldn't even walk around the restaurant. And if I had not done all that exercising, and I was really good at it, I probably could have lasted a couple of more years. But I had already worn out and killed off those little baby neurons that had grown next door to the dead ones to try to help along. So it was a very challenging time. And even a question that I get now from people is, how do I find a post-polio doctor? And there is no such thing. First of all, we've discovered that 7 minutes in medical school is what is allotted to polio information. And there are doctors who now have taken on lots of polio patients in their practice, and they have learned along the way what works and what doesn't work. But there is no such thing as a specialist in post-polio. You have
Right,
to,
because we thought we had gotten rid of it. So we have basically, there have been almost no cases of polio in the United States since what, the 80s.
well, we
And
have one now. We have one
we
now.
have one now, it's right. But
But yes,
but we certainly had a lot of people who in the 1940s and 50s had polio, are now adults, are aging, and are beginning to experience the kinds of syndrome.
and what we suggest is that they find a muscular neurologist or who specializes in that. And then it's a question of ruling out. Do you have MS? Do you have ALS? Do you have anything that is known to us? And once you rule out all of those really scary diseases, you're left with post-polio syndrome, which is still invisible. You know, I know people who have been asymptomatic as a child and didn't get polio as we know it, and yet they have post-polio syndrome now. And it's hard to know how many of us there are. We just don't know. And so
what is the diagnosis? I mean, you said ruling out, but is there something that's really a direct diagnosis? You can do a test and say yes or no.
no,
I
there
heard that there was something about a spinal tap.
well, that is a really dramatic and painful way to find out if you had polio.
Right.
And who cares at this point? We only know what we feel and what we have. I don't know if I had type 1 or type 3 or type 2. Does it matter? No, it really doesn't matter what I had.
Right.
I was able to get vaccinated once the vaccines were out in 1955, 56, but I had polio in 1944, 11 years before that. So it doesn't matter what I had. It only matters now that I am disabled, but I don't appear terribly disabled if I'm standing and talking to you. When I get in my wheelchair, I do. When I can't take a walk anymore, I do. When I use a scooter, I do. But that's what's happened to me from being upright and camouflaging for many, many years and passing for normal, which a lot of polio patients, survivors will tell you that's the language they used. I passed for normal for many years, and now I can no longer pass for normal.
Right. So what about people whose disabilities have been in lower limbs, and now as they're aging, are they getting symptoms in other parts of their bodies?
They are. It's because polio touched everything in the spinal cord. Everything. It just touched it. Where did it land? Where did it cause paralysis? Unknown as to why it landed where it did. But I do have swallowing problems now on occasion. I do have a weakness in my hands that I never had before. I mean, I was very strong. 50-pound boxes of chocolate in my bakery, no big deal. When I first got a scooter, 50 pounds to put it in the trunk, not a big deal. Now I don't have that upper body strength anymore. And that's not just age. That is definitely a feeling of the muscles have changed and have gotten weaker. So everything has changed for us, everything. And our goal And I sit now, luckily, as the chair of a global post-polio syndrome advocacy group that's under a heading, under the disability umbrella at Rotary. The most amazing thing is that we have people from all over the world on our steering committee. And what our goal is, number one, is to advocate and bring awareness to the fact that this exists. And number two, reminding ourselves that we are an aging and dying population in our hemisphere. We all are in our 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and we're on our way out. And so how do we put together the resources that children all over the world who have gotten polio up until recently, a little girl in Zambia got one last week. How do we put together the resources so that the people who have polio as youngsters now, 30 to 40 years from now, will be in the same boat we're in now?
Right, because you began experiencing these symptoms when you were in your young 40s.
So that
And
was
there
40
are an
years.
awful lot of children around the world who now are approaching that age, who are polio survivors. The other thing we should point out is that of the people who get polio, only less than 1% actually have paralytic polio, and the other people who actually get it, sometimes it only feels like a cold or something relatively minor.
Right.
And yet 40 years from now, they could be impacted by these symptoms.
Exactly. When I was on a tour on a movie, there's a documentary about my restaurant, my closing of my restaurant called Breakfast at Ina's. When I was on the movie circuit, we were in a lot of film festivals, people would say to me and whisper, you know, I had polio, but my parents didn't want anybody to know. And so we just kept it a secret. And I said, well, do you have any siblings? And they would say, yes. And first I would ask, were they having any muscle weakness, any issues? And they would look at me like I was magic. And they would say, yes. And I said, what about your brother that you just mentioned? Is he going to the doctor complaining of things? And their eyes would open. They say, yes. And I said, there is a very strong probability that he had a very mild case of polio at the time, which didn't leave him paralyzed, but he's also having the same effects now. So we have no idea how many of this there are. We only know that the more people we impact and tell, the more help people will get. Is there anything that can cure it? No, there is nothing that can cure it, but you can learn to ameliorate some of it by conserving to preserve. I had one woman tell me, we keep getting our mom out to the mall. We keep telling her she's got to walk the mall. And I went, so you really want to hurt her, right? What are you talking about? And I said, the more you make her walk, the worse it will be for her. And they had no idea. They thought pushing was better than not.
Right. It's that counterintuitive part of it. So I know that your disability has been relatively mild through much of your life. And, you know, right. You were able to do skydiving and mountain climbing
and skiing on one leg in the Rockies and the Alps. Yes.
Right. And now I know things are getting worse, but you've been talking with people who have much variety in their own disabilities throughout their lifetime. Have you heard anything about problems getting good care from their physicians? There's been some noise lately about some physicians are reluctant to treat people with different disabilities because it's harder for them and takes longer in the room, and they don't make as much money doing it, or they don't have the facilities.
Yes, they have 15 minutes, you know, when they sign on to a practice and they're told that they have to see a patient every 15 minutes. There really is not a lot of time for a debriefing of what the disabled person needs to tell the doctor, or the doctor needs to know. There's also serious issues with trying to get up on an examining table sometimes. Doctors are hesitant because they know they cannot give the kind of care that is required of their oath to do that. So there are serious issues about this, serious issues. And I have, yes, heard that from people. I have a friend who has a very terrible long life of Lyme's disease, for her to find a doctor who really gets it and who was willing to sort out her many, many, many issues is horrifying. The stories that she tells me are horrifying. And then she is just, she walks in the door and she looks like just fine. And then she starts enumerating the issues. So there are lots of us out there in many forms.
Absolutely. And the time issue comes up for anybody with a complex medical condition. And I've talked with a lot of them. So for a doctor to have the time and energy to sort out the underlying issue from amongst the many things that people are experiencing is always an issue. But in addition to that, for people who have mobility limitations or who are always in a wheelchair, there are worse issues because sometimes the doctor needs a lift to help the patient up to the table or onto the scale or something like that. And he may or may not have that equipment available in his practice. So
this is very true and very disheartening. It's very, very disheartening. I went to a doctor who's entered a practice where I've been going for many years, a doctor retired. And when he came into the room, I said, I'm going to debrief you. I said, I know we have 15 or 20 minutes. And so I need you to stop typing and I need you to listen to me. Mm-hmm. And so I was able to go back and sort of bring him up to speed of where I was as of yesterday. And then he said, I have a diabetes that I keep under control with just diet. And he said, I just want to check your feet to be sure they're okay. And I said, you're going to find that my right foot is ice cold and it has nothing to do with diabetic circulation. It has to do with the lack of elasticity in the skin on that foot from polio. Mm-hmm. And I had to educate him. And I was happy to say that he paid very close attention. So, but yes. One has to advocate. One has to advocate.
Right. So patient education is very important in a condition like this. So the patient has to understand their own condition so that they can efficiently communicate that to the physician and make sure they're on the same page.
And a lot of patients are hesitant. They see a white coat and they think God has just walked into the room. Well, ain't happening. No. I'm in control of this because this is my body. And you can ask anybody who is disabled. They know more about their body and its function than any doctor will ever know. And it's up to them to inform and educate the doctor.
That's a very important statement for all patients, but in particular for people with complex conditions, because the doctor is with you, as you said, for 15 minutes once every couple of months. You are with your body 24 hours a day, 365. So you definitely know more about your body, which does not mean you've been to medical school. So you have to balance what your knowledge of your body and what you need from that doctor is the perspective of his medical training. And if you can put that together efficiently, that makes the best possible combination.
Right. So go in there, everybody, and be prepared to be your own advocate and to educate the doctor. I'll tell you one very funny story. So I'm in physical therapy and there's a Pilates thing and you have to put both feet and you have to push this thing aside. And he said to me, so are you doing like 50-50? And I said, no, right now I'm doing 80-20, right? The good foot and the weak foot, 80-20. And I said, do you want me to do 50-50? And he said, yes. So I did 50-50. And I said, do you want me to do 100-0? And he looked at me and I took my good leg away and I did it just with the weak leg. And he went, you can do that? I said, next time ask me.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's how it is. That's how it is every day, every single day.
Right. And what are the critical differences? What happened since your last visit? Has something changed? Those kinds of things are very important to communicate. So tell us about this international organization that you are with. What's the name of it? And do you have a website?
We do. It's on the Facebook right now, Post-Polio Syndrome Advocacy, PPSA Advocacy. And we are meeting twice a month. And then one time we have a steering committee, then we have a speaker, then we have an open meeting because we want to bring in people. And we have close to 300 on our mailing list now. And our goal is to have people from all over the world because we want somebody who's on the ground in Malawi. And we don't need to have a polio there. We need somebody who can say what's going on there and how can we access information and share information with you. So our goal is to be as global as quickly as we can, and it's under the umbrella of a disability and Rotary. So, and you don't have to be a Rotarian to join in either. So on the Facebook page, Post-Polio Syndrome Advocacy, you can sign up and then we will get you on the mailing list.
Great. Post-polio syndrome advocacy. I'll put the link to the Facebook page in the comments for the show. And it's a really great group. Let's see. What else do we need to cover today, Ina, that I haven't asked you?
I think we covered it all. I wanted to be sure that I told you about how it all began and how I was able to camouflage, and then when I couldn't anymore, found a community of people who were suffering as I was in the 80s. So I'm very grateful to have the chance to share that story.
Thank you so much for doing that. And for anybody else out there, if you're beginning to experience these kinds of symptoms, you are not crazy. There is a good community of folks to help you sort through what is post-polio syndrome and how to communicate that most efficiently to your physician and get some help for it.
And if your physician is skeptical, just refer them to the World Health Organization book on diseases and show them.
Yes, right. It does exist in the third world. It is going to emerge more and more as people get to be older. Thank God they're getting older. That's a very good thing. But they may need some additional support in modifying what they do and modifying the supportive equipment that they may need in order to continue to be healthy and happy people in this society.
Amen. Perfectly end. Perfect ending. Thank you, Joy.
Thank you so much for joining me, Ina, and we wish everybody a good day and good health and be a powerful patient. Thanks so much.
Amen. Amen. Thank you.
Thank you.